What really lies beyond the gates of the man the world calls the king of country? Most fans picture glittering stages, roaring crowds, and the polished charm of George Strait beneath blinding spotlights. But far from the noise, down a quiet Texas road lined with mesquite and dust, another world exists. One few outsiders have ever witnessed. It's the private kingdom where fame ends and the real George Strait begins. Out there, silence replaces applause. The land stretches wide and wild, shaped by the same patience that once built his music. For decades, his songs have told stories of heartbreak and home. Yet the truest chapter has never been written on an album. It's written across the acres he calls his refuge. Behind those discreet iron gates lies the rhythm that never fades, the rhythm of a man who built peace with his own hands. George Strait has never needed extravagance to prove his worth. He built a life that mirrors his music, simple, strong, and enduring. To understand the legend, you have to step away from the flash of awards and follow the trail back to where it all began, a place where a boy learned how to work before he learned how to sing. Because long before there were platinum records or sold-out tours, there was dust in his boots and sweat on his brow. And before there was the king of country, there was simply George Harvey Strait Jr., a quiet boy from South Texas whose world revolved around land, labor, and loyalty. The same soil that clung to his boots would one day cling to every lyric he wrote. The story of his private world, the ranches, the stillness, the family that keeps him grounded, begins not behind grand gates, but under open skies. Out there, in the quiet heart of Texas, the foundation for his legend was laid, not in applause, but in endurance. And that's where we start. Because to understand what he protects today, you first have to meet the boy who grew up believing that silence was a song waiting to be heard. The road to George Strait's legacy doesn't begin with fame. It begins in the dust-swirled stillness of South Texas. Potet, 1952. A town where the sky seems bigger than the world itself. Out there, work was the language everyone spoke. His father, John Byron Strait, spent weekdays as a math teacher and weekends as a cattleman. The lessons he passed on weren't taught from a book. They were learned through blistered hands and long days under the Texas sun. Young George rode horses before he drove cars. He fixed fences before he held microphones. Each sunrise brought chores that taught discipline and quiet focus, two traits that would later define his every performance. On the ranch, there was no applause for effort, only the satisfaction of a job done right. That unspoken code became his foundation. Say little, do more, let the results speak. When chores ended, music began. In the family's modest home, an old record player filled the air with the voices of Hank Williams, Bob Wills, and Merle Haggard. Those songs weren't entertainment, they were a lifeline. Stories of heartache and endurance that felt as real as the dirt under his boots. Without realizing it, George was absorbing lessons about storytelling, honesty, and restraint. Lessons he'd one day deliver back to the world in his own steady tone. By high school, the guitar had become his second tool, another way to work with his hands. He wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing rhythm. When friends gathered to play music after long days in the sun, George's voice carried an unexpected weight. It was calm but commanding, like someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. Even in a small garage band, his presence drew attention. Quiet but magnetic. In 1970, diploma in hand, he stood at a crossroads. The open land had taught him patience, but life was about to demand courage. What he didn't know was that his next chapter would carry him farther from Texas than he'd ever been, and closer to discovering what music really meant. The same discipline that once kept him steady on horseback was about to guide him through an entirely different kind of journey. One where the rhythm of boots on dirt turned into the rhythm of boots on stage. When George Strait enlisted in the U.S. Army, he carried more than a duffel bag. He carried the values of the ranch: discipline, endurance, and quiet pride. Stationed in Hawaii, he found himself surrounded by ocean instead of open plains, but his sense of purpose stayed the same. The Army's structure fit him perfectly: order, responsibility, and respect. Things his father had already drilled into him back home now shaped his every day. It was there, among the barracks and distant surf, that music stopped being just a hobby. A notice on the base bulletin board mentioned an Army-sponsored country band called Rambling Country. Strait joined out of curiosity, unaware he was stepping onto the path that would define his life. The first time he sang for an audience of fellow soldiers, something clicked. He wasn't nervous. He was home. His calm presence, that quiet confidence learned in the Texas fields, seemed to expand under the lights. People listened, really listened, not because he demanded attention, but because he didn't. Performing for small military gatherings gave him a taste of something he'd never known: the way music could connect strangers without words. Each song carried a fragment of the home he'd left behind. Between sets, he wrote letters to Norma, his high school sweetheart, the girl whose steadiness mirrored his own. Distance didn't weaken their bond, it deepened it. In 1971, they married, beginning a lifelong partnership built not on fame or fortune, but on shared simplicity. Together, they learned how to create a sense of home anywhere. Whether in a tiny Army apartment or a Texas farmhouse years later, the constant was each other. That grounded strength would become the quiet armor protecting him through every storm that success would bring. When his service ended, George Strait returned to Texas carrying a different kind of discipline. Not just military precision, but creative purpose. He enrolled at Southwest Texas State University, studying agriculture, a natural extension of his respect for the land. But music kept whispering, patient and persistent. He joined a local group, Ace in the Hole Band, playing honky-tonks and small bars where the smell of beer mixed with the scent of cedar and dust. Those nights were rough, loud, and honest. The crowd didn't care about dreams of fame. They cared about truth, and truth was something George Strait had in abundance. Every note he sang carried the same steady calm he'd learned as a ranch boy, the same discipline he'd refined as a soldier. Without realizing it, he was building the bridge between both worlds, the hard land of Texas and the stage that would one day echo his name across America. And as the music grew louder, so did destiny. What began as weekend sets in roadside bars was about to turn into something much bigger, a movement that would reshape the sound of country music itself. But before the crown, before the fame, there was the man learning how to turn silence into a sound that would never fade. By the time George Strait stepped onto the small stages of Texas honky-tonks with the Ace in the Hole Band, something inside him had already shifted. The discipline of a soldier, the patience of a rancher, and the quiet heart of a storyteller had begun to merge. Those smoky bars became his new training ground. There were no bright lights or glittering awards here, just sawdust floors, neon beer signs, and people who wanted songs that told the truth. Every night, as the band played, George studied the crowd the same way he once studied the horizon, watching for subtle shifts, reading their mood. He learned how to command a room, not through theatrics, but through authenticity. When he sang, he didn't chase attention, he drew it. There was something about that stillness, that composure, that made people lean in closer. But for all his talent, breaking into the music industry wasn't simple. Nashville had its trends, its formulas, its polished stars who followed the flash more than the feeling. George didn't fit the mold. His sound was too traditional, too honest, too rooted in the past to seem marketable at a time when the genre was shifting toward pop influences. Labels turned him down, one after another, unable to see the quiet revolution forming in front of them. Yet, George never wavered. The same patience that taught him how to mend fences and ride long hours on the ranch now guided his journey in music. Rejection didn't sting. It just meant more time to sharpen his craft. He kept playing, night after night, refining his sound. A blend of pure country tone, western swing, and the kind of heart that only real life could write. Then, in 1981, destiny finally met preparation. MCA Records took a chance on him, and Unwound hit the airwaves. It wasn't just a debut, it was a statement. The song carried the twang, the tempo, and the truth that country music had quietly been missing. Listeners heard something different, a sound that didn't beg for attention, but demanded respect. Overnight, the name George Strait started to spread beyond Texas, across radio stations, ranches, and small-town diners. What followed was a streak of success few could imagine. Album after album, hit after hit, George Strait stayed grounded. He didn't chase trends, he created a standard. His music reminded people of who they were, where they came from, and what they'd forgotten to feel. But fame never changed the man behind the microphone. While other artists sought the spotlight, George always sought balance. Between tours, he returned to the land. Between shows, he returned to silence. The ranch became his anchor, a place where he could trade stage lights for starlight, microphones for open skies. It was more than home, it was his center of gravity. Because in the whirlwind of fame, George Strait never forgot the one truth his father taught him. No matter how far you travel, always leave your boots close to the dirt that raised you. And that dirt, that Texas soil, would continue to shape not just the man, but the legend he was becoming. The road had led him from dusty bars to national fame. But now came the real test, holding on to who he was when the world wanted to turn him into something else. Fame is loud. It tempts, distracts, and often consumes. But George Strait built his career on something that silence could never steal: discipline. That same invisible strength that had carried him through the fields, the barracks, and the honky-tonks now became the armor protecting him from the chaos of stardom. While other artists courted publicity, George preferred privacy. He avoided interviews, skipped the glamour circuits, and rarely gave the press more than a glimpse. To some, that mystery was confusing. To others, it was magnetic. The less he spoke, the more people listened when he finally did. That restraint wasn't an act. It was a reflection of who he truly was. Behind every hit song, behind every perfectly measured performance, there was a man who treated his craft with military precision. Rehearsals ran like drills. Every note mattered. Every pause had a purpose. He demanded excellence, not just from his band, but from himself. The audience didn't see exhaustion or error. They saw effortless grace. And yet behind that grace was relentless focus. That discipline extended to every corner of his life. On tour, while others partied late, George kept routines: early mornings, quiet meals, and time spent reading, reflecting, or talking with Norma. His voice, his energy, his spirit, all were guarded with care. He understood that fame was fleeting, but legacy was earned. Even as accolades poured in, from Grammys to Hall of Fame inductions, his humility never faltered. Awards were displayed, but they never defined him. His true trophies were simpler: a sunrise over the ranch, a quiet evening ride, the steady rhythm of a life built on purpose, not pretense. That balance between stage and soil, between applause and stillness, became his secret weapon. Most stars burned bright and fast. George Strait chose to burn slow and steady. Each album, each concert, carried the same level of integrity as the last. He wasn't reinventing himself. He was refining himself. In the heart of that routine lay his greatest truth. Success didn't change his identity. It revealed it. The cowboy code that had shaped his childhood became the compass that guided his fame. Humility, hard work, and honor. And that discipline didn't just preserve his career, it protected his soul. While others in the industry fell victim to fame's excesses, George remained unshaken. He knew that true power wasn't about standing taller than others. It was about standing firm when the world tried to move you. So when the spotlight grew brightest, George Strait did what he always had. He stepped back into the quiet, back to the ranch, back to the rhythm that never lied. Because for him, discipline wasn't about control. It was about peace. The legend of George Strait wasn't born from the noise of applause, but from the strength of silence. And as his music continued to reach millions, the man himself kept choosing stillness over spectacle. A choice that made his story not just rare, but timeless. As George Strait's legend grew, so did the illusion of perfection that surrounded him. To the world, he was the embodiment of composure, the man who never faltered, never stumbled, never cracked under the pressure. But behind that calm exterior, life had its storms, and George was no stranger to loss. The early years of his success were marked by triumphs, sold-out shows, chart-topping hits, and a growing fan base that idolized him. Yet, as the lights burned brighter, fate began to cast its shadow. The same silence that made George mysterious also became his way of coping when tragedy struck. Quietly, without the world ever truly understanding the weight he carried. In 1986, when George and his wife Norma lost their daughter Jennifer in a car accident, the man who had once held every crowd spellbound was suddenly confronted with a silence no audience could fill. It was the kind of pain that defied words, too deep for songs, too personal for the public. For many, grief becomes performance, but not for George. He retreated. He stepped away from interviews, from the cameras, from the spotlight itself. Fans noticed the change. The press speculated, but George never explained. Instead, he let his music speak, subtly, quietly, through lyrics that carried more weight, more reflection, and more restraint. He understood something few artists ever could, that some wounds aren't meant to be shared. They're meant to be lived through. This period reshaped his entire outlook on fame. The applause, once exhilarating, became quieter. Success no longer felt like the goal. Peace did. His focus turned even more toward the ranch, toward Norma, and toward the simple acts of living that fame often takes away. But even in grief, George never lost his discipline. Instead, he transformed pain into perspective. His performances after that time carried a new kind of strength, less about power, more about truth. The man who once sang with unshakable confidence now carried a softness in his tone, a kind of earned wisdom that comes only from surviving what most cannot. Fans may not have known every detail of his sorrow, but they felt its echo. In his restraint, in his dignity, in the way he continued to show up for the music, they saw a reflection of resilience. And that's what made him even more beloved. He wasn't just the cowboy who conquered the charts. He was the man who carried his heart quietly and still stood tall. Through the years, George's silence became his strength. He proved that you don't need to share everything to be understood, and you don't need to shout to be heard. His music, calm, consistent, and timeless, became the bridge between pain and peace, showing that true artistry isn't about expression alone. It's about endurance. And as the years passed, George's connection to the land deepened once again. The ranch wasn't just a place of rest anymore. It was his sanctuary, his reminder that life moves on, even through the hardest seasons. The quiet acres of Texas had seen him rise, and now they were helping him heal. But that wasn't the end of his evolution, because while loss shaped him, it also refined him. It gave his next chapter a deeper purpose, a reason to protect the world he had built, and to give back to the values that raised him in the first place. After years of fame, heartbreak, and endurance, George Strait's story circled back to where it began: the cowboy code. It wasn't just a lifestyle anymore. It was his philosophy. In an industry that constantly reinvented itself, he chose to stay loyal to the old ways: honesty, loyalty, respect, and work done right. Every decision he made reflected that code. He didn't chase trends or try to please everyone. He didn't let labels dictate his sound. When others went digital and experimental, George doubled down on tradition. Fiddles, steel guitars, and storytelling remained at the heart of his music, not because he was stuck in the past, but because he knew the past still had something to say. That integrity became the foundation of his empire. His concerts weren't about fireworks or spectacle. They were about connection. He'd walk on stage, tip his hat, and sing like he was talking directly to each person in the crowd. No gimmicks, no fluff, just pure country soul. And that simplicity, that honesty, made him eternal. Off stage, that same cowboy discipline shaped every part of his life. He treated people with the same respect he demanded. He valued his privacy, not because he was hiding, but because he believed that a man's worth was in his character, not his headlines. The same code that guided his early ranch days, show up, work hard, keep your word, guided his entire career. But there was something deeper to that way of living. For George, being a cowboy wasn't just about boots and hats. It was about principles. It meant standing tall when the world tried to bend you. It meant choosing integrity when shortcuts looked tempting. And most of all, it meant humility, remembering that every success rests on something bigger than yourself. Even as new artists emerged and country music evolved, George never faded, because authenticity never ages. He became a quiet mentor, a living example of how fame can coexist with decency. Younger singers looked to him not just as a legend, but as a blueprint. Proof that you can stay grounded even when the world lifts you up. Every time he returned to the ranch, it was like closing a circle. The same hands that once held a rope now held a microphone. But the purpose never changed: to work with care, to live with grace, and to let every note carry a piece of truth. The cowboy code wasn't just something he followed. It was something he passed down. It lived in his family, his crew, and his fans. Because even though his songs spoke of love, loss, and life, what people remembered most wasn't the melody, it was the man behind it. And in an age where fame often demands noise, George Strait's quiet strength became a rare kind of rebellion. His code was simple but unbreakable. Stay true, stay steady, stay real. Because at the end of the day, the world doesn't remember the loudest man in the room. It remembers the one who stood his ground when everyone else forgot what mattered. As the years rolled on, George Strait's story transformed from that of a rising artist to something much greater, a living legacy. He didn't just sing country music, he defined it. While trends came and went, while genres blurred and identities shifted, George remained constant, a compass pointing true north for anyone who'd ever been lost in the noise. But what made his legacy so enduring wasn't just the music, it was the manner in which he carried it. His career became a testament to restraint, to the power of letting your work speak louder. Even as decades passed, his songs never aged. Amarillo by Morning, The Chair, Check Yes or No. These weren't just hits. They were stories written into the fabric of American life. Every lyric felt lived in. Every note felt honest. They carried the scent of dirt roads, the ache of distance, and the quiet pride of a man who knows where he stands. But beyond the music, his legacy lived in his principles. George Strait proved that greatness doesn't demand chaos. It demands consistency. He didn't burn bridges or chase headlines. He built respect, brick by brick, song by song, through decades of authenticity. And that respect went both ways. His fans didn't just admire him, they trusted him. When George announced his farewell tour in 2012, the reaction was immediate. It wasn't shock, it was reverence. The Cowboy Rides Away tour became one of the most emotional send-offs in music history. Arena after arena filled with tears, cheers, and gratitude. Because everyone knew they weren't just watching a performer, they were saying goodbye to an era. But even then, George did what he'd always done. He left with dignity. No drawn-out drama, no spectacle, no forced comeback talk. He stepped away the same way he had lived, quietly, gracefully, with every step grounded in purpose. And when he did return for special performances later, it felt less like a comeback and more like a reunion between old friends. His influence began to stretch beyond country. Artists across genres referenced him, admired him, and studied his example. Even those who didn't grow up on country music recognized something unshakable in his approach. Proof that authenticity transcends sound. And back home, life remained simple. George continued to wake early, ride the pastures, and check on the land. Fame may have taken him across the world, but his heart never left Texas. The same fields that raised him now reflected his story. Steady, quiet, enduring. The legacy of George Strait isn't just in records sold or awards won. It's in the lesson that real strength doesn't need to shout. That humility can outlast hype. That when a man builds his life on truth, the echoes last far beyond his time. And as the cowboy continued to ride through the twilight of his career, one thing became clear. George Strait didn't just leave a mark on country music. He became the measure of it. By the time most people achieve George Strait's level of fame, they've long lost the quiet that made them who they were. But not him. Beneath the legend, beneath the gold records and the awards, remained the same man who once stood in dusty boots, looking out over the Texas plains. Because the truth about George Strait isn't found in headlines or documentaries. It's found in the spaces between his songs. in the pause before a note, in the silence after applause fades. It's there that you can feel the essence of who he truly is, a man who never chased glory, but earned it through grace. When fans talk about him today, it's not with the frenzy reserved for fleeting stars. It's with the warmth you feel when you talk about someone who's been part of your life for years. His music played at weddings, at rodeos, at road trips, even in moments of heartbreak. He became the background to people's memories, not because he demanded it, but because he deserved it. And that's what separates George from the rest. His legacy isn't built on noise, it's built on presence. He's proof that you can dominate an industry without dominating a room, that you can lead without shouting, that you can win by simply being real. Even now, as new generations discover him, there's something magnetic about his calm. In a world addicted to constant reinvention, George Strait stands like a mountain, unmoved, unshaken, timeless. His story reminds us that sometimes the strongest sound in the world is silence. But behind that calm exterior lies a man of quiet emotion. Those who know him best speak of his loyalty, his humor, his humility. A man who prefers a night under the stars to a spotlight, who still finds joy in the simple rhythm of daily life, feeding horses, fixing gates, and taking slow drives through his land. That's the paradox of George Strait, the superstar who never acted like one, the man who could sell out stadiums but still stop to talk to a neighbor at a gas station, the icon who built an empire but still lived by a rancher's clock. And that's why his story will never fade, because beneath the fame, there's a truth everyone can recognize, that peace, not power, is the real success, that staying grounded, even when the world tries to lift you higher, is the greatest victory of all. As the sun sets on decades of music and the cowboy rides toward his horizon, one image remains: George Strait, hat tilted low, the quiet wind at his back, and that same calm confidence that's carried him through it all. No fireworks, no grand finale, just a man, his land, and the echo of songs that will never die. Because some legends don't end with noise, they end with silence that says more than words ever could. In his mind,